All right, let's talk about something we see everywhere. Corporate promises to be green or sustainable. But you gotta wonder, right? What's real action and what's just really good marketing? Well, today we're gonna cut through all that noise and get to the bottom of what corporate environmental responsibility actually looks like.
So let's just dive right in with the big question. What does it really mean for a business to go green? I mean, is it just about changing a logo to a nice leafy green color, or does it mean changing the entire way they do business? To figure that out, we really have to start with the problem they're trying to solve in the first place.
And that problem, well, it all starts with what we call the corporate footprint. Think of it as the mark that every business, whether it's a tiny startup or a massive corporation, leaves on our planet. So let's take a closer look at what that impact is actually made of.
Okay, so the unavoidable starting point here is pollution. I mean, for pretty much any company that makes a physical product, some kind of damage to the land, sea, or air is kind of part of the deal. The real question isn't if they have an impact, they do. The question is, what are they doing about it? How do they manage it?
And, this impact isn't just one simple thing, it's a whole spectrum of issues. We're talking about air pollution, the toxic stuff coming out of smokestacks. We see it in our water with industrial discharge. That's just a fancy word for toxic liquids or effluent being pumped directly into rivers and oceans. And of course, we see it on land with the huge challenge of just figuring out what to do with all our solid waste.
And look, this isn't just about protecting some abstract idea of the environment. No, the stakes are deeply, intensely human. A lot of these industrial pollutants are carcinogenic. In other words, they can cause cancer. And that right there, that elevates this whole thing from an environmental issue to a full-blown public health crisis.
This brings us to some really intense debates, like the one that's always swirling around nuclear power. Sure, plant operators have to keep radioactivity within legally safe limits, but critics push back hard. They argue there's actually no such thing. For them, any level of radioactivity, even the tiniest minimum amount, is unacceptable. It really shows you the gap between what's legally allowed and what people feel is truly safe. So, okay, we've got these massive problems. What's the response? Well, the story doesn't just end with pollution, thank goodness. It starts to pivot towards solutions. And that whole push really began with rules, regulations, and a simple but pretty powerful idea: recycling.
Now, change like this doesn't just happen on its own. It's not driven by a single force. It's more like a team effort, with pressure coming from all sides. You've got government stepping in to set the baseline with strict regulations and standards. You have huge bodies like the European Union creating specific rules for the entire market, like how much recycled content a product has to have. And then you have lobby groups, think Greenpeace or Friends of the Earth, acting as watchdogs, constantly pushing companies and governments to do more.
All this pressure forced a total rethink of how we deal with our waste. The old way of doing things, just burying it in landfills or burning it in incinerators, was a dead end. Literally, it just couldn't go on forever. The new model, recycling, completely reframed the conversation. It treats waste not as something to get rid of, but as a resource, a raw material for something new.
But here's the thing. Just managing waste, even recycling, is still just reacting to a problem we've already created. The conversation had to evolve, and it did, towards a much bigger, more ambitious idea. What if we could design our systems so they don't create the problem in the first place? That is the core goal of sustainability.
So what does sustainability actually mean? It sounds complicated, but it's a pretty simple and profound idea. It's all about managing our natural resources in a way that doesn't deplete them. It's about not cheating future generations. It's making sure the forests, the oceans, the clean air we rely on today will still be here for them tomorrow.
So how do we get there? Well, the path to sustainability really rests on two main pillars. First, it's about being much better stewards of the resources we're already using. And second, it's about innovating, developing completely new, renewable sources of energy so we can finally leave the old, finite ones behind.
Let's make this real. What does this look like in practice? Okay, take the fishing industry. The unsustainable path is overfishing until the fish populations just collapse. The sustainable path, carefully managing those stocks so they can replenish. Same thing with logging. The bad way is clear-cutting a forest. That's deforestation. The sustainable way is actively replanting it for the future. That's reforestation. And that second pillar, renewable energy sources like wind and solar power, that is the real game changer here. It's the key to finally decoupling economic growth from resource depletion. Think about it. Instead of drawing down a finite bank account of fossil fuels that will eventually run out, it's like tapping into an energy source that, for all practical purposes, never runs dry.
Okay, so we've got the problem, pollution.
And we've got the ideal solution, sustainability. But here's where it gets really complicated. In the real world of corporate ads and PR, how do we know what's a genuine commitment and what's just clever fiction? This brings us to the critical battle between truth and something called greenwashing.
This is what every company wants you to believe they have: strong environmental credentials. It's basically the evidence they show the world to prove that they care about the environment. You can think of it as their green resume.
But then you have the dark side, greenwashing. This is what happens when a company's talk doesn't match its walk. They put out these glossy reports and run these feel-good ads that make them look way more environmentally friendly than their actual practices justify. It's an illusion of progress, pure and simple.
So here's the fundamental difference, right? Real environmental credentials are built on hard facts and measurable actions. Greenwashing, on the other hand, is all about creating an impression. It's about advertising, and it's often deliberately disconnected from the facts on the ground. One is about substance, the other is pure spin. And that really leaves us with this final, crucial question. In a world that's just flooded with companies all claiming to be green, responsible, and sustainable, how do we, as consumers, as citizens, as people who care, how do we separate the genuine fact from the misleading fiction? Honestly, that's the challenge for all of us